1 hour after burying her father, 6-year-old Sophie Reed stood shivering in the front yard as her stepmother Victoria poured ice-cold water over her small body. The child trembled under the freezing November rain, clutching a soaked teddy bear to her chest, as if it were her last lifeline in the world. The bear had been the final gift from her mother before the car accident 3 years ago. Now with her father gone too, Sophie had nothing left but this sodden remnant of happier times. "Get this filth off you," Victoria Reed hissed, her elegant funeral attire now replaced by her true nature. "A cursed child brings bad luck. Your father died because of you." Sophie's small lips trembled, turning blue in the biting cold. Her honey-colored hair plastered against her pale face as rain mingled with tears on her cheeks. The temperature was dropping rapidly as evening approached, the child's thin black dress offering no protection against the elements. "Please, Mom, I'm so cold," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain drumming against the pavement. Victoria's face contorted with disgust. "Don't call me that. I'm not your mother." She turned toward Richard Hayes, her husband's younger brother, who stood in the doorway with a satisfied smirk. "She's nothing but a burden now. Always has been." Richard stepped into the rain, deliberately stomping on the teddy bear that had fallen from Sophie's grasp. "Your father was a fool who wasted his money on you. That ends today." Neighbors peered through curtained windows at the scene unfolding in the wealthy Boston suburb. Lights flicked on in nearby houses, but curtains quickly closed again. No one wanted to get involved with the powerful Reed family's affairs, especially not against Victoria Reed, whose connections reached into every corner of local society. Sophie collapsed onto her knees, reaching for her ruined teddy bear. Her small fingers dug into the wet fur as she clutched it against her chest. "Daddy," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Where do I go now?" The rumble of a powerful engine cut through the sound of falling rain. Headlights swept across the scene as a midnight blue Cadillac pulled to an abrupt stop in front of the Reed mansion. The car door opened with purpose, and a tall figure emerged into the rain. Victor Harrington stood motionless for a moment, taking in the scene before him. At 58, his imposing 6'2" frame still carried the strength of a man who had built his fortune through sheer determination. His silver hair, usually perfectly styled, quickly dampened in the rain. His sharp gray eyes narrowed as they moved from the shivering child to the woman standing over her. Something inside Victor shifted at that moment. The successful real estate magnate, known for his calculated business decisions and emotional detachment, felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades: raw protective fury. The sight triggered a flood of memories. Victor, at 8 years old, standing in the rain after his alcoholic mother's boyfriend had thrown him out of the apartment. The same helpless shivering, the same desperate clutching of his only possession. A small toy soldier his father had given him before abandoning the family. The radio from a nearby apartment had been playing "Cats in the Cradle" by Harry Chapin. The song's lyrics about an absent father had seemed cruelly appropriate even to his young mind. Victor stepped through the gate without hesitation, his expensive Italian shoes sinking into the wet grass. His eyes never left the child. "What exactly is happening here?" His voice was deep, controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel that made Victoria straighten immediately. Victoria quickly rearranged her features, the cruelty replaced by practiced charm. "This is a private family matter. I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Victor ignored her, removing his cashmere coat and draping it over Sophie's trembling shoulders. The fabric engulfed her tiny frame, but warmth began to seep back into her limbs. Through the rain, Victor noticed the purple bruising around the child's collarbone, partially hidden by her wet hair. Richard stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and Victoria. "Who the hell do you think you are, barging onto private property?" Victor stood to his full height, towering over Richard. "Victor Harrington." He said the name without emphasis, but recognition flickered in both their eyes. His reputation preceded him. "The real estate developer." Victoria's tone changed instantly, calculating the potential benefits of this unexpected connection. "What an honor, though I must say this is hardly the time for business discussions. We're dealing with a family situation." Family situations rarely involve children standing in freezing rain. Victor's eyes returned to Sophie, who was looking up at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Are you all right, child?" Before Sophie could respond, Victoria cut in. "She's fine. Just a little discipline after misbehaving at her father's funeral." Children need structure after tragedy. Victor noticed how Sophie flinched at Victoria's words, her small body tensing under his coat. The girl's eyes dropped to the ground in a practiced gesture of submission that Victor recognized all too well. A real man protects children, no matter whose they are. Victor's words were quiet but carried across the yard with absolute clarity. Your husband was such a man. Victoria's expression faltered. You knew Thomas. We had business dealings. Victor knelt down to Sophie's level, his back to the adults. What's your name? Sophie, she whispered so softly he almost missed it. Sophie, I'm Victor. Would you like to come somewhere warm while we sort this out? The child looked up at him, then fearfully at her stepmother. The decision seemed to weigh impossibly heavy on her small shoulders. Richard stepped forward aggressively. She's going nowhere. Victoria has full guardianship now. Leave our property before I call the police. By all means, call them. Victor straightened, pulling out his phone. I'm sure they'd be interested in these bruises. Or perhaps I should call my friend at Child Protective Services directly. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. You have no right to interfere. You don't know anything about the situation. I know enough. Victor's voice remained steady. I know Thomas Reed was a good man who would never allow his daughter to be treated this way. Thomas is dead, Richard spat, and his precious daughter is no longer the priority. The estate is what matters now. In that unguarded moment, Richard had revealed too much. Victor's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This wasn't merely about cruelty to a child. There were financial motivations behind their behavior. Victoria sensed the mistake and quickly intervened. Richard is distraught. We all are. Thomas's death has been difficult for everyone. She reached for Sophie, her manicured fingers like claws. Come inside now, Sophie. Sophie shrank back, pressing against Victor's legs. The gesture of trust from this terrified child made something inside Victor harden with resolve. I'm calling my attorney, Victor said, ear-city dialing. And the police. This child needs medical attention and a safe place to stay while the authorities sort this out. Victoria's charm vanished completely. I'll ruin you. Do you think your business can survive the scandal? When I tell the world you tried to kidnap my stepdaughter? A single man with no family suddenly interested in a little girl. Victor didn't flinch. Make your threats. Unlike you, I have nothing to hide. Neighbors were beginning to emerge from their homes now, watching the confrontation from safe distances. Victor recognized the power of witnesses and raised his voice slightly to ensure they could hear. Sophie needs medical attention. She's been out in this weather too long and appears to have unexplained injuries. I'm taking her to the hospital and the authorities can meet us there. His phone connected and he spoke clearly. Jessica, it's Victor. I need you at Boston General immediately. We have a child welfare emergency. Jessica Barnes was the city's most prominent child advocacy attorney. The mention of her name caused Victoria's expression to shift from anger to calculation. Sophie remained silent, shivering despite the coat. Victor knelt down again. Sophie, would you like to get warm and see a doctor? I promise no one will hurt you. The child looked into his eyes, searching for something. Whatever she saw there made her give the slightest of nods. Victor picked her up carefully, noticing how little she weighed. The teddy bear remained clutched in her small hands, water still dripping from its matted fur. This isn't over, Victoria called as Victor carried Sophie to his car. She belongs to me legally. You can't just take her. Victor turned back, his face illuminated by the porch light. A child is not property. She belongs to herself. He settled Sophie gently into the passenger seat of his Cadillac. And I'm not taking her. I'm rescuing her. As Victor drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Victoria and Richard stood in the rain, already arguing with each other. He had 15 minutes before the police would likely intercept him. 15 minutes to make the most important decision of his life. Sophie sat silently beside him, the oversized coat pooled around her like a protective nest. Her eyes remained fixed on the ruined teddy bear in her lap. That bear looks special, Victor said gently, trying to establish trust. Mr. Buttons, Sophie whispered. Mommy gave him to me before heaven. Victor felt his throat tighten. We'll get him dried and fixed up. Daddy said Mommy watches me through Mr. Buttons' eyes. Her small fingers traced the bear's plastic eyes. Now Daddy's with her too. Victor gripped the steering wheel harder, a rush of memories threatening to overwhelm him. His own childhood, the foster homes, the broken promises. The cycle he'd sworn to break but had never had the chance to test. His career had become his life, his buildings the only legacy he'd thought to leave. Sophie, I promise you this, you won't be alone. The words surprised him as much as they might have surprised her. Victor Harrington didn't make promises easily. But looking at this child, he knew with absolute certainty he would move heaven and earth to keep this one. The hospital loomed ahead, its emergency room lights cutting through the rain. Victor had called ahead, his influence ensuring discretion and immediate care. As he parked, he turned to Sophie. The people here will help you. There will be doctors and nurses and my friend Jessica who helps children. They might ask questions about what happened. It's okay to tell the truth. Sophie clutched Mr. Buttons tighter. Victoria will be mad. She can't hurt you anymore. Victor hoped he could make that true. Inside the emergency room, events moved quickly. Victor's name opened doors that might have remained closed to others. A pediatrician examined Sophie while a social worker documented her injuries. Victor paced the waiting area, his phone pressed to his ear, as he coordinated with Jessica Barnes, who was already filing emergency motions for temporary guardianship. The police arrived as expected, questioning Victor thoroughly. His status in the community and Jessica's immediate involvement created enough professional buffer that the authorities agreed Sophie would remain under hospital care temporarily rather than being returned to Victoria. When the examination was complete, the pediatrician took Victor aside. Multiple contusions in various healing stages, mild malnutrition, signs of emotional distress. I'm admitting her overnight for observation and hydration. Victor nodded, his jaw tight. She won't go back to that house. The doctor's expression was sympathetic but realistic. That's not my decision to make, but I've documented everything for the record. It was nearly midnight when Victor was finally allowed to see Sophie. She lay in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the white sheets. An IV delivered fluids to her small arm. The teddy bear, somewhat dried but still bedraggled, remained clutched in her free hand even in sleep. Victor sat in the chair beside her bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. For a man who had spent decades making split-second business decisions worth millions, he found himself completely certain about this choice that would earn him nothing but might cost him everything. His phone vibrated. Margaret Shaw, the director of Haven House. He'd founded the Children's Center 5 years ago, a tax-deductible charity that he'd funded but rarely visited. Now it might become Sophie's temporary sanctuary. Victor, we are prepared for her arrival. The Blue Room is ready. Thank you, Margaret. The hearing is tomorrow morning. We'll know more then. Is she? Margaret hesitated. How is she holding up? Victor looked at the sleeping child, so vulnerable in the sterile hospital environment. She's stronger than she should have to be. After ending the call, Victor leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, prepared for a sleepless night. His mind raced through contingency plans. Victoria would fight back, of that he was certain. She wouldn't relinquish control of Thomas Reed's fortune easily, and Sophie was her ticket to that wealth. Sophie stirred in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her lips. Victor leaned forward, gently adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes fluttered open, momentary panic giving way to recognition. You're still here, she whispered, surprise evident in her voice. I promised, didn't I? Victor replied. I'll stay as long as you need. Sophie studied his face with the unnerving directness only children possess. Victoria said no one would want me. Victor felt a surge of anger toward the woman who would say such a thing to a child. Victoria was wrong about many things. Sophie's fingers tightened around her bear. Daddy got sick after she came. He was strong before. Victor's attention sharpened. What do you mean, Sophie? He couldn't get up anymore. Victoria gave him special medicine. Sophie's eyes dropped to her bear. He didn't like it, said it tasted funny, but she made him take it. A cold sensation spread through Victor's chest. Could Thomas Reed's death have been something other than the reported heart failure? He kept his voice casual, not wanting to alarm the child. Did you tell anyone about the medicine? Sophie nodded. I told Uncle Richard. He said I was making up stories. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then Victoria locked me in the dark room when nobody was looking. Victor struggled to maintain his composure. You're very brave to tell me this, Sophie. Very brave indeed. The child's eyelids began to droop, the medication and exhaustion overtaking her again. Are you going to go away like mommy and daddy? The question pierced Victor's carefully constructed emotional armor. No, Sophie, I'm not going anywhere. As she drifted back to sleep, Victor found himself remembering a moment nearly a decade earlier. Thomas Reed, younger and full of energy, had approached him after a particularly difficult business quarter. Victor's company had been on the brink of bankruptcy following the 2008 crash. Reed had offered a partnership that had ultimately saved Harrington Developments from collapse. When Victor had asked why, Reed had simply said, "Because sometimes a man needs someone to believe in him." Victor had repaid the loan with interest, but he now wondered if he had fully repaid the debt. Perhaps this was his chance. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Jessica Barnes swept in at 7 a.m. sharp, impeccably dressed and radiating competence. At 45, she had built her reputation defending children in Boston's most complex custody cases. "We have Judge Hoffman," she informed Victor in the hallway outside Sophie's room. "Not ideal. He tends to favor biological connections and legal guardians." "Victoria is neither," Victor pointed out. "She's a stepmother of less than 2 years. But she has the marriage certificate and lived in the family home. We need more than suspicions, Victor. We need evidence of abuse or neglect that the court can't ignore." The preliminary hearing was set for 10 a.m. Sophie had been cleared for release, but the question of where she would go loomed large. Margaret Shaw arrived as they were preparing to leave. Her 65 years carried with dignity and purpose. The former social worker had been running Haven House since its inception, turning Victor's financial investment into a true sanctuary for children in crisis. "Hello, Sophie," Margaret said warmly, approaching the bed where the child sat fully dressed but clearly anxious. "My name is Margaret. I run a special house where children stay when they need a safe place." Sophie clutched Mr. Buttons, eyeing the older woman warily. "Is it like the dark room?" Margaret's expression remained gentle, though Victor saw the flash of concern in her eyes. "No, dear. Every room has big windows and colorful walls, and no one gets locked in." Sophie seemed to consider this. "Can Mr. Buttons come too?" "Of course. We even have a special hospital for stuffed animals who need fixing." Margaret produced a small hairbrush from her bag. "Would you like me to help with your hair before we go?" The simple, nurturing gesture brought tears to Sophie's eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. She nodded and turned so Margaret could gently work through the tangles in her honey blonde hair. Victor watched the interaction, marveling at Margaret's ability to establish trust so quickly. His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Roberts, the private investigator he'd contacted at dawn. "Background check on Victoria Reed underway. First red flags already showing." The courthouse was imposing, a stone edifice designed to intimidate. Victor carried Sophie from the car, her slight weight a reminder of her vulnerability. Reporters had somehow caught wind of the story, the wealthy developer versus the grieving widow over the fate of an orphaned child. Cameras flashed as they hurried inside. Victoria arrived simultaneously, stepping from a sleek town car with Richard at her side. She had transformed overnight from the cruel woman in the rain to the perfect grieving stepmother. Her black dress was modest, her makeup subtle enough to highlight the carefully cultivated red-rimmed eyes. She carried a small photo album prominently displaying pictures of Thomas and Sophie. "A performance worthy of an Oscar," Jessica muttered under her breath as they entered the courtroom. Judge Gerald Hoffman presided from the bench, his 62 years evident in the deep lines of his face. He regarded the assembled parties with the wary skepticism of someone who had seen too many families torn apart by greed disguised as concern. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine temporary custody of Sophie Reed, pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services," he announced. "I'll hear brief statements from both parties." Charles Blackwood, Victoria's attorney, spoke first. His reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. "Your Honor, my client is devastated not only by the loss of her beloved husband, but now by the attempted kidnapping of her stepdaughter by a business rival. Mr. Harrington has no familial connection to this child, no experience as a parent, and a questionable interest in inserting himself into this situation. Victoria Reed has been Sophie's stepmother for nearly 2 years and is the legally designated guardian. The child belongs at home with family during this period of grief." Jessica rose next, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, Sophie Reed was found yesterday evening, standing in the rain, soaked to the skin, while her stepmother, Victoria Reed, poured cold water over her. She has documented bruising consistent with physical abuse. The attending physician also noted signs of malnutrition. We are asking for emergency temporary placement at Haven House Children's Center while a full investigation proceeds. Judge Hoffman frowned. Mrs. Reed, these are serious allegations. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Your Honor, I'm heartbroken that a moment of poor judgment has been so twisted. Sophie had become hysterical after the funeral, rolling in mud and refusing to come inside. I was simply trying to clean her up outdoors before bringing her in. As for any bruising, children play and have accidents. I've been nothing but loving to Sophie since I married her father. The judge turned his attention to Victor. Mr. Harrington, while your concern is admirable, I'm troubled by your involvement. What is your connection to this family that justifies such intervention? Victor stood. Your Honor, I knew Thomas Reed professionally. He was a man of integrity who loved his daughter deeply. When I witnessed Sophie being mistreated, I couldn't simply drive past. Any decent human being would have done the same. A convenient story, Blackwood interjected. But Mr. Harrington has something of a record himself, a sealed juvenile case involving violence. The courtroom fell silent. Victor felt Jessica tense beside him. Your Honor, whatever Mr. Blackwood is referring to occurred more than 40 years ago when Mr. Harrington was a minor. It has no bearing on this case, Jessica argued. Judge Hoffman's expression was unreadable. The court will take a 15-minute recess while I review the documentation from the hospital and preliminary reports. As they waited in the hallway, Victor paced while Sophie sat quietly with Margaret. Jessica pulled Victor aside. How did they know about your juvenile record? It's been sealed for decades. Victor's mouth tightened. Someone did their homework. When I was 16, I put my final foster father in the hospital after finding him beating his 7-year-old son. The charges were eventually dropped when the full circumstances came to light, but the record was supposed to be sealed permanently. They're playing dirty, Jessica muttered. We need to be prepared for worse. When court resumed, Judge Hoffman looked troubled. Having reviewed the medical documentation, I find sufficient cause for concern to warrant temporary removal of the child from the Reed home pending investigation. Victoria began to protest, but the judge raised his hand. However, placement with an unrelated individual with no prior relationship to the child is not in keeping with standard protocol regardless of his resources or intentions. Victor felt his heart sink. Sophie Reed will be placed at Haven House for a period of 72 hours, while Child Protective Services conducts a thorough home study and investigation. Mrs. Reed will have supervised visitation rights. We will reconvene in 3 days to reevaluate based on the findings. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. Sophie would be safe at Haven House, temporarily giving Victor time to build a stronger case. As they left the courtroom, Victoria approached, staying just far enough away to prevent Sophie from hearing. This isn't over, Harrington, she said, her voice honey-coated poison. You've made a powerful enemy today. I'm not the enemy, Victoria. I'm simply the first person who wasn't afraid to stand up to you. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a second, revealing the rage beneath. You know nothing about me or what I'm capable of. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never stopped your car in the rain. Richard appeared at her side, his expression calculating. Back off, Harrington. You're out of your depth. Victor looked between them, seeing the united front of self-interest. Whatever happened to Thomas, whatever you two are hiding, I will find it. That's a promise. Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. Promises to dead men don't matter, Mr. Harrington. Only the living collect their debts. Haven House stood on 3 acres of wooded land outside Boston, a Victorian mansion converted into a temporary home for children in crisis. Victor had purchased the property and funded the renovations, but had visited only for the obligatory photo opportunities at fundraising events. Now, as he walked through the bright hallways with their cheerful murals and comfortable furnishings, he regretted his detachment from the project. Margaret led Sophie to the Blue Room, a space designed for younger girls with an underwater theme. The walls were painted with ocean scenes, and the twin bed was covered with a quilt patterned with colorful fish. This is your space while you're here, Margaret explained. No one comes in without knocking, and you can decorate it however you like. Sophie stood in the center of the room, Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest, her expression a mixture of wonder and hesitation. It's pretty. And safe, Victor added from the doorway. Victoria can't come here without permission and supervision. Sophie looked up at him. her blue eyes serious beyond their years. She'll still be mad when I go back. The simple statement, delivered with the resigned certainty of a child who expected punishment, strengthened Victor's resolve. "Sophie, do you like to draw?" Margaret asked, opening a drawer filled with art supplies. The child nodded, some animation returning to her face. "Why don't you draw while I talk to Mr. Harrington? Then we can have lunch and meet some of the other children." Sophie settled at the small desk by the window, carefully selecting a purple crayon. Victor followed Margaret into the hallway. "She's remarkably composed for what she's been through," Margaret observed. "That worries me more than if she were having tantrums. This level of control in a 6-year-old suggests long-term emotional suppression." Victor nodded grimly. "She mentioned a dark room where Victoria would lock her up, and something about her father's medication tasting strange." Margaret's expression darkened. "I'll have our child psychologist speak with her tomorrow. Gently, of course. We have 72 hours, Margaret. After that, the judge could send her back. Then we'd better make those hours count." Victor returned to the blue room to say goodbye. Sophie was drawing intently, her small hand gripping the crayon with determination. The picture showed a house with a small rectangle beneath it. "What are you drawing, Sophie?" She hesitated before answering. "Daddy's secret box. He showed me before he got sick. Said it was important." Victor knelt beside her. A secret box. Where was it? Behind the books in his office. The special books that were Grandpa's. She continued coloring, adding a small heart to the box. "Daddy said if anything happened to him, the box would keep me safe." Victor felt a surge of hope. If Thomas had suspected something and left evidence. "Sophie, this is very important. Did you tell Victoria or Uncle Richard about this box?" Sophie shook her head. "Daddy said it was just for me, and for the person with the silver key." "What silver key?" Sophie shrugged, already starting a new drawing. "Don't know. Daddy just said the right person would have it." Victor gently touched her shoulder. "I have to go now, but I'll come back tomorrow. Margaret will take good care of you." Sophie looked up, her eyes suddenly vulnerable again. "You promise." "I promise, Wokies." Victor felt the weight of those words, a contract he would not break. "No one is going to hurt you again." As he turned to leave, Sophie spoke once more. "Mr. Victor, Daddy used to say that real daddies keep their babies safe no matter what. Are you going to be safe?" The question caught him off guard. This child concerned for his safety when her own world had collapsed. "Yes, Sophie, I'll be safe. And so will you." As Victor drove away from Haven House, his resolve crystallized into something unshakable. In his 58 years, he had built an empire of steel and glass, accumulated wealth beyond his childhood dreams, and earned the respect of the business world. But he had never fought for anything as important as Sophie Reed's future. His phone rang. It was Jennifer Myers, Thomas Reed's private nurse. "Mr. Harrington, I think I have information you need to hear. About Thomas's death. It wasn't a heart attack." Victor tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can we meet tonight?" "Name the place and time." "The coffee shop at the corner of Maple and 5th. 8 o'clock. Her voice lowered. "And Mr. Harrington, be careful. Victoria has eyes everywhere." As the call ended, Victor caught movement in his rearview mirror. A black sedan had been following him since he left Haven House, keeping a consistent distance. Someone was watching him already. The battle for Sophie Reed had truly begun. And Victor Harrington, a man who had spent his life building walls around himself, was now prepared to tear down every barrier between this child and her right to safety. For the first time since his own childhood, he felt the stirring of something long dormant, the fierce protective instinct that separated men who merely existed from those who truly lived for something greater than themselves. The rain had stopped, but darkness cloaked Boston as Victor Harrington parked his Cadillac a block away from the coffee shop on Maple and 5th. He scanned the street for the black sedan that had followed him earlier. No sign of it now, but caution was warranted. Victor had not built a real estate empire by underestimating opponents. Inside the coffee shop, evening, patrons hunched over laptops and paperbacks. The aroma of espresso and cinnamon filled the warm air. Victor selected a corner table with a clear view of both entrances, his back to the wall. Old habits from hard years. Jennifer Myers arrived precisely at 8, her nurse's scrubs replaced by jeans and a simple gray sweater. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to crisis. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing tired eyes and the tense expression of a woman carrying a heavy burden. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from Victor. "I've been debating whether to reach out since I heard about what happened with Sophie." Victor studied her. "You were Thomas Reed's private nurse during his illness. For the last 6 months of his life." Jennifer's fingers nervously twisted the paper napkin before her. "What I'm about to tell you could cost me my nursing license if it became known I waited this long to come forward. Whatever you share stays between us unless absolutely necessary for Sophie's protection." Jennifer nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Thomas Reed didn't die from heart failure. He was poisoned." Despite his suspicions, hearing the confirmation sent a cold wave through Victor's body. "You're certain?" "I started noticing patterns. Thomas would improve when Victoria traveled, then deteriorate rapidly upon her return. His symptoms never quite matched his official diagnosis." She pulled a small notebook from her purse. "I began documenting changes, medications, schedules, visitors. At first, I thought I was being paranoid." "What changed your mind?" "I caught Victoria replacing the contents of his heart medication capsules." Jennifer's voice dropped to a near whisper. "She didn't see me. I took one of the discarded capsules she thought she'd disposed of. The contents tested positive for arsenic compounds." Victor's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" "I did, to Richard Hayes." Shame colored her features. "He was Thomas's medical proxy when Victoria was unavailable. He promised to handle it, said he would contact authorities. 2 days later, Thomas was dead, and Richard told everyone I'd been dismissed the week before for medication errors." "He set you up." Jennifer nodded. "My word against theirs. Victoria made a substantial donation to the hospital board the same week. The matter was quietly dropped, and I was blacklisted from private nursing in Boston." Victor absorbed this information, pieces connecting in his mind. They were working together. "I believe so. Though sometimes," Jennifer hesitated, "sometimes I sensed Richard was afraid of her, following orders rather than partnering." "Do you still have the evidence, the capsule, your notes?" Jennifer pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. "Everything's here. Original notes, photos I managed to take, and a sealed sample I had tested by a lab in New Hampshire under a false name." She slid it across the table. "I should have come forward sooner, but after losing my reputation, my career, I was afraid." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Victor acknowledged. "It's what Victoria and Richard count on. What changed your mind now?" "Sophie." Jennifer's eyes softened. That child would sit by her father's bed for hours reading to him, even when he was too weak to respond. "When I saw the news about what happened after the funeral, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Victor pocketed the flash drive. "This could help keep her safe." "There's something else." Jennifer glanced nervously toward the door. Thomas suspected what was happening toward the end. He was lucid in his final week when Victoria thought he was too drugged to function. He told me he'd left evidence, something that would protect Sophie and reveal the truth. He mentioned a hidden safe or compartment. Sophie drew a picture today, a box behind books in Thomas's office. Jennifer nodded eagerly. "That sounds right. Thomas was obsessed with first editions, had a collection passed down from his father." Victor stood, leaving several bills on the table. "Jennifer, you should be careful. Victoria isn't someone to underestimate. I'm leaving Boston tonight. Got a position at a hospital in Seattle." She rose, adjusting her purse strap. "Use the evidence to protect Sophie. That's all I want." "I will." Victor extended his hand. "Thank you for your courage." As Jennifer turned to leave, her eyes widened. Through the coffee shop window, Victor saw a familiar black sedan slow to a crawl outside. "There's a back exit through the kitchen," Victor said quietly. "Go now. I'll create a distraction." Jennifer slipped away as Victor deliberately knocked over his coffee cup, drawing attention as he apologized loudly to the barista. By the time he exited the main entrance, Jennifer was safely gone and the sedan had moved down the block, its driver watching Victor intently. Victor walked directly toward the vehicle, his stride purposeful. The sedan's engine started, but before it could pull away, Victor reached the driver's window and knocked firmly. The window lowered to reveal a heavy-set man in his 40s, surprise evident on his face at being confronted. Following me must be tedious work, Victor said conversationally. Victoria not paying you enough for subtlety. The man recovered quickly. Don't know what you're talking about, mister. Tell your employer that if she wants information on my movements, she should ask directly. And let her know that professionals use at least 2 cars for surveillance. Victor smiled without warmth. Amateur hour ended when she decided to target Sophie Reed. The window rolled up and the sedan pulled away with unnecessary speed. Victor memorized the license plate before walking calmly back to his own vehicle. The confrontation had been a calculated risk, but establishing that he wouldn't be intimidated was important. Victoria needed to understand her usual tactics wouldn't work. Back in his penthouse apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, Victor reviewed Jennifer's flash drive. The evidence was damning photos of Victoria tampering with medication, Jennifer's meticulous notes, tracking Thomas's symptoms against Victoria's presence, lab results confirming arsenic. It painted a clear picture of deliberate poisoning over months. Yet would it be enough? Without Jennifer's direct testimony, a skilled attorney like Blackwood could dismiss the evidence as circumstantial or fabricated. They needed the contents of Thomas's secret box. Victor's phone rang at 11:42 p.m. Daniel Roberts, the private investigator he'd hired that morning. I've got preliminary information on Victoria Reed, Daniel's gravelly voice announced without preamble. Born Victoria Chambers in Sacramento, has quite a history of wealthy, short-lived marriages. 3 prior husbands, all significantly older, all died within 2 years of the wedding. No criminal record, but insurance investigations were launched after the second husband's death. Nothing stuck. A black widow, Victor muttered. What about Richard Hayes? Thomas Reed's younger half-brother. Same father, different mothers. History of gambling, debts, and failed business ventures. Reed Financial bailed him out at least 6 times in the last decade. Currently owns 15% of the company, but has no active role due to what company minutes delicately call temperament issues. Follow the money, Victor instructed. I want to know every financial transaction between them for the past 3 years. Already on it. One more thing, Victoria made contact with a known associate of Dmitry Volkov this afternoon. Victor's blood chilled. Volkov controlled much of Boston's underground economy. You're certain? Sambaon. Positive. My source inside Volkov's organization confirmed the meeting. Don't know what was discussed, but Victoria left looking satisfied. Increase security at Haven House immediately, Victor ordered. I want round-the-clock coverage, best people you have. Consider it done. Watch your back, Victor. Volkov doesn't play by gentlemen's rules. After ending the call, Victor stood at his wall of windows, watching the city lights shimmer across the dark harbor. Involving Volkov elevated the situation from a custody battle to something potentially lethal. Victoria was escalating faster than anticipated. Sleep proved elusive. Victor's mind replayed Sophie's words about her father's secret box. By dawn, he had formulated a plan to access the Reed mansion. As majority shareholder of Reed Financial following Thomas's death, Victor had legitimate business reasons to visit the company's home office, which happened to be located in Thomas's private study. At 9 a.m., he called Victoria directly. Mr. Harrington, her voice oozed false pleasantry. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Business, Mrs. Reed. As majority stakeholder in Reed Financial, I need to review certain documents in Thomas's home office. The quarterly board meeting is next week, and there are discrepancies in the reports. A pause. The company CFO could provide whatever you need. The specific files I require are in Thomas's private safe. He showed me the location during our last meeting. The lie rolled smoothly from Victor's tongue. Unless you'd prefer I bring the board's attention to these irregularities. Another pause, longer this time. Fine, the housekeeper will admit you at 11. You'll have 1 hour supervised. Touch nothing but the financial documents. Your hospitality is noted, Victor replied dryly before hanging up. At Haven House, Sophie had slept through the night for the first time since her father's death. Margaret reported. The child had begun to open up with Dr. Elaine Parker, the center's child psychologist, describing in concerning detail Victoria's punishments and her father's declining health. Sophie sat cross-legged on her bed when Victor arrived, carefully adding color to another drawing. This one showed a teddy bear wearing what appeared to be armor made of bottle caps and tinfoil. That's quite a bear, Victor observed, sitting in the small chair beside her bed. It's Mr. Buttons with special protection, Sophie explained seriously, so nobody can hurt him again. The simple statement reflecting Sophie's understanding of her situation struck Victor profoundly. Children adapted to protect themselves, creating shields both physical and emotional. Sophie, I'm going to your house today to look for your daddy's special box. Can you tell me exactly where to find it? Sophie set down her crayon, her expression suddenly intent. In Daddy's office, behind the big red books on the bottom shelf. You have to push the third book and the whole shelf moves. What does the box look like? It's wooden with the stars carved on it. Daddy's daddy made it. Sophie's brow furrowed. But you need the silver key. Do you know where the key might be? She shook her head. Daddy said the right person would have it already. Victor checked his watch. I need to go now, but I'll come back this afternoon. Dr. Parker says you're doing really well. Sophie nodded solemnly. She doesn't ask tricky questions, like Victoria. As Victor rose to leave, Sophie suddenly scrambled off the bed and wrapped her arms around his legs in a quick, fierce hug. Before he could react, she had retreated back to her drawing, not meeting his eyes. The spontaneous gesture of trust left Victor momentarily speechless. He gently touched her shoulder. I'll be back soon. The Reed mansion appeared different in daylight, less gothic tragedy, more nouveau riche ostentation. Victoria had clearly influenced the recent renovations, replacing Thomas's understated elegance with gaudy statements of wealth. The housekeeper, an older Latina woman with knowing eyes, admitted Victor silently and led him to Thomas's study. Victoria waited inside, dressed impeccably in designer morning wear. 1 hour, she reminded him coldly. Elena will remain present. Your trust is overwhelming. Victor surveyed the room, noting the extensive bookshelf covering the far wall. Don't let me keep you from your grieving. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against Thomas's mahogany desk. I underestimated you initially, Mr. Harrington. A mistake I won't repeat. Threatening me directly or through Volkov's associates won't change the outcome, Victoria. Sophie will be protected. Her composure slipped momentarily, surprise flickering across her features before the mask returned. I have no idea what you're implying. Now the financial documents you claim to need. Victor moved to the bookshelf, scanning the lower shelves. I'll find what I need. Victoria watched him for several minutes before apparently losing interest. Elena will show you out when you're finished. Touch nothing personal. After she left, Victor turned to the housekeeper. Elena has Mrs. Reed been in this office often since Thomas passed. Elena glanced toward the door before responding quietly. Every night, searching. The senor he hide things from her when he was sick. She very angry about this. Did Thomas ever mention a special box to you or important papers? Elena shook her head. No, but... She hesitated. The day before he died, Senor Reed asked me to look after Miss Sophie if anything happened. He say, the truth is in the stars, Elena. Remember that for Sophie. Victor's attention sharpened. The stars, Elena nodded toward the bookshelf. He loved those old books about stars. Astronomia, from his father. Victor located the red leather-bound astronomy volumes immediately, an antique set on the bottom shelf. Following Sophie's instructions, he pressed the third book. With a soft click, a section of shelving swung outward, revealing a small cavity in the wall. Inside sat a wooden box precisely as Sophie had described, with stars meticulously carved into its surface. Victor reached for it, but found it firmly attached to a mounting bracket. He bolted down, Elena whispered, after he started to suspect. The box had a simple keyhole, small and silver. Victor examined it closely, thinking about Thomas's words that the right person would have the key already. What key did Victor possess that might... Understanding dawned. Victor reached into his pocket and withdrew his keychain. Among the modern keys was a small silver one he'd carried for years, the key to his first real estate office, long since relocated, but kept as a reminder of his beginnings. Thomas had given him that office space at a reduced rate when no one else would take a chance on the former foster kid with big dreams and no connections. Every man needs a key to his future, Thomas had said then. Victor inserted the silver key into the lock. It fit perfectly. The box opened with a soft click. Inside lay a sealed envelope, a USB drive, and a small leather journal. Victor quickly photographed everything with his phone before removing the contents. He opened the envelope first. Victor, Thomas's familiar handwriting began. If you are reading this, my suspicions were correct and I didn't survive. Victoria is not who she appears to be. I discovered her true identity too late. Evidence in this box proves she poisoned her previous husbands and has begun the same process with me. The USB contains financial records showing Richard's involvement. He helped her in exchange for gambling debt, forgiveness, and promises of company control. Most importantly, the journal documents everything regarding Sophie. Victoria has harmed her repeatedly when they were alone. I've arranged for alternate guardianship for Sophie through my updated will at Morrison and Beck law offices. You'll find a key to their file room in this box as well. Protect my daughter, Victor. You're the only one I trust. Thomas. Cold fury washed through Victor as he photographed each page of the journal documenting Thomas's observations of Sophie's unexplained injuries, Victoria's cruelty when she thought no one was watching, and his growing suspicions about his own declining health. Senor, 10 minutes left, Elena warned softly. Victor quickly gathered the evidence, securing it in his briefcase. Elena, would you consider testifying about what you've witnessed in this house regarding Sophie's treatment? Fear crossed the housekeeper's face. La Señora, she would ruin me, my family. I would ensure your safety and financial security. Your testimony could save Sophie. Elena closed her eyes briefly. The little one she cry at night, and the Señora tell her she join her parents if she make noise. I hear through the door. Her expression hardened with resolve. Yes, for Miss Sophie I will speak. The sound of a door closing elsewhere in the house alerted them. Go now, Elena whispered urgently. Victor had just closed his briefcase when Victoria reappeared, Richard trailing behind her like an agitated shadow. Find what you needed, Victoria asked, her tone implying she knew exactly what Victor had been doing. Indeed. Victor met her gaze steadily. The financial discrepancies are quite illuminating. Richard stepped forward, his complexion flushed. What exactly are you implying, Harrington? Merely that numbers tell interesting stories. As Thomas often said, ledgers never lie even when people do. Richard's eyes darted nervously to Victoria, who maintained her composure. Elena will see you out. We have funeral arrangements to complete. As Elena led Victor to the front door, Richard followed several paces behind, his anxiety palpable. At the threshold, Victor turned back. One question, Richard. When did you realize she was using you just like she used Thomas? Richard's face contorted with surprise and anger. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? The gambling debts she covered for you created quite a hold. But what happens to partners who've outlived their usefulness in Victoria's world? Ask her previous husbands. Oh, wait, you can't. Victor walked to his car, feeling Richard's troubled gaze following him. Sowing discord between conspirators was a calculated risk, but Richard seemed the weaker link, more likely to break under pressure. The black sedan was parked across the street, its driver making no attempt to hide his surveillance. Victor photographed the vehicle openly before driving away. Let them follow. The evidence was secure. At Morrison and Beck law offices, the key from Thomas's box provided access to a sealed file containing Thomas Reed's updated will. As Thomas had indicated in his letter, the will explicitly named alternate guardians for Sophie, in the event of his death, Victor Harrington as primary guardian with Margaret Shaw as secondary. Thomas had signed the updated will 3 days before his death. The law firm had attempted to contact Victor immediately after Thomas's passing, but Victoria had intercepted the messages claiming Victor was traveling abroad. Armed with the will, Thomas's evidence, and Jennifer's documentation, Victor returned to Jessica Barnes's office. The attorney reviewed everything methodically, her expression growing grimmer with each new piece of evidence. This is explosive, she said finally. The will alone changes everything. Combined with the evidence of poisoning and child abuse, she shook her head. We need to move carefully. Victoria has significant resources and connections. The hearing is tomorrow, Victor reminded her. I want Sophie protected permanently, not just temporarily. We'll request an emergency hearing with Judge Hoffman this afternoon. With this evidence, he should grant an extended protective order at minimum. And criminal charges against Victoria and Richard. Jessica frowned then. That's more complicated. The district attorney would need to be convinced the evidence warrants charges. Given Victoria's connections, they might move cautiously. Make it happen, Victor insisted. Whatever it takes. Jessica studied him. You've become quite invested in Sophie's welfare, beyond what Thomas's letter requested. Victor hadn't fully examined his own motivations. She deserves someone fighting for her, someone who won't give up, like someone should have fought for you as a child. The question struck uncomfortably close to truth. Perhaps. Jessica's expression softened slightly. Just be certain you're doing this for Sophie, not to resolve your own past. Does the motivation matter if the outcome benefits her? Victor countered. It might. Children sense when their obligations versus genuine priorities. Jessica gathered the evidence into a secure file. I'll contact Judge Hoffman immediately. Victor left for Haven House, his mind processing the morning's revelations. Thomas had trusted him with Sophie's future, had planned for it even before his death. The responsibility felt both heavy and strangely right. At Haven House, chaos greeted him. Police cars lined the driveway, and officers were taking statements from staff members. Margaret hurried toward him as he parked, her face pale with worry. Victor, thank God you're here. What happened? Someone tried to take Sophie. Margaret's voice shook slightly. Two men claiming to be from Child Protective Services. They had convincing identification, but our security protocols required additional verification. When our staff called the CPS office, the men attempted to force their way in. Cold dread washed through Victor. Sophie. Safe, Dr. Parker recognized something was wrong and hid with her in our panic room. Security apprehended one man, but the other escaped. Victor surveyed the scene, fury building. Victoria's work. The police think so too. The captured man has prior arrests for work with Volkov's organization. Victor headed inside, where officers were photographing signs of struggle in the main hallway. A security guard sported a bruised jaw where he'd apparently intercepted an attacker. In the center's secure room, Sophie sat with Dr. Parker, unnaturally still, her small face composed in that too-adult expression that spoke of practiced trauma response. She looked up as Victor entered, and for the first time since he'd met her, tears filled her eyes. You came back. The simple statement, heavy with surprise that an adult had kept their promise, broke something in Victor's carefully maintained composure. He knelt beside her chair. Of course I came back. I promised, didn't I? Sophie launched herself into his arms with unexpected force, her small body trembling. Victor held her carefully, this fragile child who had endured too much yet still found the courage to trust. The bad men said Aunt Victoria sent them to bring me home, Sophie whispered against his shoulder. But this is my home now. Her words tightened Victor's resolve. Haven House was no longer secure. Victoria had proven she would go to extreme measures to regain control of Sophie, and by extension, Thomas's fortune. Sophie, we need to move you somewhere even safer until the judge makes his decision tomorrow. Dr. Parker nodded her agreement. Sophie and I have talked about creating a safety plan. This might be a good time to implement it. Victor made arrangements immediately. His private estate on the Massachusetts coast had state-of-the-art security and was staffed by people he trusted implicitly. Daniel Roberts would provide additional protective personnel. As they prepared to leave, Sophie insisted on bringing not just Mr. Buttons, but all her recent drawings. They're important, she explained seriously. They tell the true story. Victor examined the drawings more carefully this time. Beyond the obvious depictions of the secret box and the armored teddy bear, Sophie had created visual records of her life with Victoria and her father's decline. In crayon and marker, she had documented Victoria putting magic dust in her father's food, being locked in the dark room, and Victoria's violent outbursts. The drawings wouldn't be admissible as evidence, but they provided crucial insight into Sophie's experiences, insight that might help the judge understand the severity of the situation. Jessica called as they were leaving Haven House. Judge Hoffman has agreed to review the new evidence at tomorrow's hearing. But Victoria has filed a counter motion alleging you fabricated evidence and manipulated Sophie for financial gain. Hardly surprising, Victor replied, watching Sophie safely enter the secure vehicle with Margaret and Dr. Parker. She's desperate. There's more. Richard Hayes contacted my office 30 minutes ago. He wants to meet with you alone. Victor's interest peaked. Did he say why? Only that he has information that changes everything. He sounded nervous, possibly intoxicated. The discord seed planted earlier had germinated faster than expected. Arrange it. Tonight somewhere public. Victor, be careful. This could be a trap. Or Richard's self-preservation instinct kicking in. Either way, we need to hear what he has to say. At Victor's coastal estate, Sophie showed her first signs of genuine relaxation. The property's sweeping ocean views and warm wood-paneled interior created an atmosphere of security. Seeing the child tentatively explore the gardens, Mr. Buttons clutched in one hand, Victor experienced an unfamiliar sensation. Something like peace combined with purpose. Margaret joined him on the terrace watching Sophie. She's remarkably resilient. Most children would be completely withdrawn after such experiences. Will she recover fully? The question revealed more of Victor's concern than he had intended. Margaret considered carefully. Recovery isn't linear, especially for children who've experienced trauma. But with consistency, safety, and appropriate therapy, yes, she can heal and thrive. She studied Victor thoughtfully. The question is whether you're prepared for that journey. It's long-term, Victor. Years, not months. Victor hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. His focus had been immediate protection, not the extended commitment of raising a child. Yet watching Sophie examining tide pools with intense concentration, he couldn't imagine walking away once the immediate danger passed. I've built skyscrapers that will stand for generations, he said quietly. But what's the purpose of any legacy if not to improve lives? Sophie's life seems as worthy a project as any building I've constructed. Margaret smiled. That's a start, though you might want to work on not thinking of her as a project. Victor acknowledged the gentle correction with a nod. I have much to learn. We all do with each child who comes into our lives. Margaret's expression turned serious. Victoria will continue fighting Victor. Even if we win tomorrow, she won't simply disappear. I'm counting on that, Victor replied, his tone hardening. Because when she makes her next move, it will give us the leverage to bring criminal charges. The meeting with Richard Hayes was set for 8 p.m. at the Harbor Lounge, an upscale establishment where the ambient noise provided privacy while the public setting offered security. Victor arrived early, selecting a corner table with sightlines to all entrances. Richard appeared precisely at 8, looking considerably worse than he had that morning. His expensive suit was rumpled, his complexion sallow and his hands noticeably unsteady as he slid into the chair opposite Victor. Drink, Victor offered, signaling a waiter. Scotch, neat. Richard's voice carried the slight slur of someone who had been drinking steadily throughout the day. Victor studied Thomas's half-brother, seeing now what he had missed in previous encounters. The family resemblance was minimal, but something in the set of the jaw recalled Thomas in his determined moments. You requested this meeting, Victor prompted once Richard's drink arrived. Richard took a substantial swallow before responding. Victoria plans to kill Sophie, though Victor had suspected as much. Hearing it stated bluntly sent ice through his veins. Explain. Insurance policy. $3 million. She took it out 6 months ago, named herself beneficiary. Richard stared into his glass. Same pattern as her previous husbands. Thomas first, then his heir. Clean inheritance, no complications. Why tell me this now? Richard laughed bitterly. Self-preservation, conscience. Take your pick. He finished his scotch in one gulp. She tried to give me the same special tea she gave Thomas yesterday. I poured it out when she wasn't looking. You knew she was poisoning him. It wasn't a question, but Richard nodded anyway. Not at first. Thought he was just sick. Then I found her recipe book. Old poisons untraceable by standard tox screens. By then I was in too deep. The gambling debts she covered. And other things. Richard signaled for another drink. She has evidence that would put me away for decades. I helped her access Thomas's account's altered documents. Victor leaned forward. Why does Sophie matter so much to her beyond the inheritance? Control. Victoria needs absolute control. Richard's second scotch arrived, and he stared at it before continuing. She was nobody before she started marrying rich men. Abusive childhood poverty, multiple identities. Everything she has, she took from others. She can't stand the thought of losing any of it, especially not to a child. You realize this conversation is being recorded. Richard nodded, unsurprised. Expected nothing less. I want protection. Full immunity in exchange for testimony. That's not my decision to make, but your cooperation will be noted. There's more. Richard withdrew a flash drive from his pocket. Everything I have on her. Previous identities, financial transactions, communications about Thomas's death, enough to convict her 20 times over. Victor accepted the drive. Why now, Richard? You could have stopped this months ago. Something like shame crossed Richard's features. Thomas was the golden child, always perfect, always successful. I spent my life in his shadow resenting him. He rotated his glass slowly, but he was still my brother. And Sophie, she's just a kid. What Victoria did to her. He shook his head. There are lines even I won't cross. Victoria will know you've betrayed her. Already does. She sent someone to my apartment this afternoon. Richard pulled back his sleeve to reveal severe bruising around his wrist. Said it was a warning. Next time would be permanent. Victor considered the man before him weak, complicit in terrible crimes, yet possibly their best chance at bringing Victoria to justice. Go to Jessica Barnes's office tonight. Tell her everything you've told me. She'll contact the district attorney about potential immunity arrangements. Richard nodded, draining his second scotch. She'll come after Sophie again. Tonight, probably. The hearing's tomorrow and she's running out of options. We're prepared. Richard stood unsteadily. I doubt it. Victoria always has contingencies you haven't considered. Always. He turned to leave and then paused. Thomas talked about you, you know. Said you were the most honorable businessman he'd ever met. Said if anything happened to him, you were the only one he'd trust with Sophie. The information wasn't new, but hearing it from Richard added another dimension to Thomas's faith in him. Don't mistake self-preservation for redemption, Richard. You've still got blood on your hands. Richard nodded grimly. Some stains don't wash off. I know that better than most. He walked away, shoulders hunched against invisible weight. Victor contacted Jessica immediately, alerting her to Richard's imminent arrival and the new evidence. Why could he call Daniel Roberts, increasing security at the coastal property and requesting background checks on all staff members, no matter how long they'd been employed? As Victor drove back to the estate, the coastal road dark and winding, his headlights caught a reflection in the rearview mirror. A vehicle was following at a careful distance, lights dimmed. Victoria's surveillance had resumed. But this time Victor welcomed it. Let her come. Every move she made now would only strengthen the case against her and cement Sophie's safety. What Victor couldn't know was that Victoria had already infiltrated his innermost circle of trust, and her most dangerous move was yet to come. The coastal estate stood sentinel against the darkness, its windows glowing amber against the midnight sky. Atlantic waves crashed rhythmically against the cliffs below, a constant reminder of nature's power and persistence. Inside, the reinforced security system monitored every approach, every door and window. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, handpicked by Daniel Roberts for their discretion and competence. Victor Harrington stood at the panoramic windows of his study, watching the moonlight dance across the restless water. His reflection stared back at him, a man transformed by purpose in the span of 3 days. The real estate magnate who had built his empire through calculated decisions now found himself guided by something unfamiliar. Pure protective instinct. His phone vibrated with a text from Jessica Barnes. Richard provided full statement to DA. Arrest warrant for Victoria being prepared. Hearing still proceeding tomorrow as scheduled. Evidence overwhelming. Progress, but Victor felt no relief. Richard's warning echoed in his mind. Victoria always has contingencies you haven't considered. Always. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Margaret Shaw entered, her usual composed demeanor slightly frayed around the edges. Sophie's finally asleep, she reported. Dr. Parker says the drawing therapy is helping. She's processing what happened at Haven House remarkably well. Children adapt, Victor murmured, sometimes too well. Margaret studied him with the penetrating horn that had intimidated social service bureaucrats for decades. Any word from Elena? She arrived safely at the safe house. Daniel's people report no one followed. She's prepared to testify tomorrow. Victor nodded mentally, tallying their growing arsenal against Victoria. Thomas's evidence, Jennifer's documentation, Richard's testimony, Elena's witness account, Sophie's medical records. It should be enough, Margaret said, reading his thoughts. More than enough for any reasonable court. Victoria isn't reasonable, and she's cornered now. Victor's jaw tightened. The most dangerous moment with any opponent is when they have nothing left to lose. Margaret's phone chimed on her with a text message. Her expression shifted subtly as she read it. Dr. Parker needs me. Something about Sophie's medication schedule. After Margaret left, Victor reviewed the security monitors. All clear. The vehicle that had followed him from Boston had disappeared from the coastal road 2 miles back. Perhaps Victoria had reconsidered a direct confrontation. The house phone rang, the private line known to only his most trusted associates. Harrington. Mr. Harrington. The voice belonged to Robert Wilson, head of estate security for over a decade. We've detected a potential breach in the southeastern perimeter. Motion sensors activated, but cameras show nothing. False alarm. Possibly. The storm's picking up, could be debris. We're investigating. Double the patrols regardless, Victor instructed, and verify all staff identities again. Already done, sir. All personnel accounted for and authenticated. Victor ended the call, uneasiness settling over him like the approaching storm clouds. Something felt wrong. He checked the time, 11:42 p.m. Less than 9 hours until the hearing that would determine Sophie's fate. He moved through the silent house toward Sophie's room, nodding to the security guard stationed in the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, soft light spilling into the corridor. Victor approached quietly, not wanting to wake the child. The room was empty. The bed covers were disturbed, Mr. Buttons conspicuously absent. Sophie's drawings remained scattered on the small desk, but the child herself had vanished. Sophie, Victor called, fighting rising panic. He checked the adjoining bathroom. Empty. The security guard appeared in the doorway, alert to Victor's concern. Sir, where's Sophie and where's Dr. Parker? She was supposed to be monitoring. Dr. Parker left with Mrs. Shaw about 20 minutes ago, sir. Said they were taking the child to the kitchen for warm milk. Victor was already moving, striding toward the kitchen with the guard close behind. The spacious, professional-grade kitchen stood empty, showing no signs of recent use. Lock down the estate, Victor ordered, adrenaline surging through his system. Full security protocol now. As alarms began to sound, Victor's phone rang Margaret's number. Where is Sophie? He demanded without preamble. Silence, then a voice that wasn't Margaret's responded. Hello, Victor. You should choose your allies more carefully. Victoria Reed. Where are they? Cold fury replaced panic in Victor's voice. Safe for now. Sophie's quite trusting when she believes she's with friends. And Dr. Parker has been so helpful. Remarkable what people will do when their family's safety is threatened. Victor signaled frantically to the security guard, pointing to the phone and mouthing, "Trace this call." The guard immediately contacted the security office via radio. If you harm them, spare me the threats. Victoria's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who had navigated similar situations before. You have something I need and I have something you want. A simple exchange. What do you want? All the evidence, Thomas's files, Jennifer's documentation, Richard's testimony, Elena's witness statement. Everything you plan to present tomorrow. Delivered to me personally by you alone. And if I refuse, a pause, then Victoria's voice hardened. Then Margaret Shaw dies first. I'll make Sophie watch. Then we'll see if the good doctor's psychiatric expertise can help the child cope with witnessing a second death. Victor's mind raced through options, calculating risks and potential outcomes. I need proof they're alive and unharmed. Check your email. Victor moved to his study, bringing up his email on the computer. A new message contained a video timestamp from 2 minutes earlier. The footage showed Margaret and Sophie seated together on a sofa in an unfamiliar room. Sophie clutched Mr. Buttons tightly, her expression fearful but composed. Margaret's face displayed a small cut above her eyebrow, but she otherwise appeared uninjured. A television in the background showed tonight's news broadcast, confirming the video's recency. Satisfied? Victoria asked. Now the exchange. You have 1 hour to collect all evidence and meet me at Thomas's grave. Come alone, or they die. How do I know you'll release them? You don't, but it's their only chance. The call ended abruptly. Daniel Roberts arrived in the study moments later, face grim. We traced the call to a cell tower near Rockport Cemetery. The video background suggests a cabin or vacation property, likely within 5 miles of that location. Start the search, Victor ordered, but maintain absolute discretion. She's monitoring police channels undoubtedly. You're not considering meeting her demands. I'm considering all options. Victor was already accessing the safe in his study wall. I need duplicates of all evidence prepared immediately. And contact Jessica, tell her to get an emergency warrant based on the kidnapping. Judge Hoffman needs to be awakened if necessary. As the estate erupted into controlled chaos, Victor examined maps of the coastal area surrounding Rockport Cemetery. The region contained dozens of vacation properties, many unoccupied during the off-season. Searching them all would take far longer than the 1-hour deadline. The security system chimed, signaling an approaching vehicle. The exterior cameras showed a police cruiser at the main gate. "Mr. Harrington," a young officer appeared in the doorway minutes later. "I'm Officer Jenkins. We received an anonymous tip about a kidnapped child at this address. Mind if we take a look around?" Victor recognized the ploy immediately. Victoria was ensuring he couldn't involve law enforcement without creating complications that would delay the rescue. "Of course, officer. My security team will cooperate fully." Victor maintained a calm facade. "Though I can assure you the only child who should be on these premises is under my legal guardianship temporarily by court order." While the officer conducted his mandated search, Victor finalized his strategy with Daniel Roberts. The security expert would lead a covert team to locate the hostages, while Victor kept Victoria occupied with the exchange. "She won't be alone," Daniel warned. "She's likely hired professional muscle." "I'm counting on it," Victor replied. "The more resources focused on me, the fewer guarding Margaret and Sophie." With duplicate evidence secured in a leather portfolio and the original safely delivered to Jessica Barnes via courier, Victor prepared for the confrontation. He studied the cemetery layout one final time, identifying potential vulnerabilities and escape routes. The police officer departed, finding nothing suspicious. 20 minutes remained before the deadline. "You're walking into a trap," Daniel stated flatly as Victor prepared to leave. "Yes." Victor checked his watch. "But sometimes the best way to disarm a trap is to trigger it intentionally on your terms." Rain had begun to fall as Victor drove toward Rockport Cemetery, heavy drops pounding against the windshield in rhythmic fury. The coastal road curved treacherously in the darkness, empty of other vehicles at this midnight hour. As he drove, memories of Thomas Reed surfaced, not just their recent business relationship, but the 30 years of connection that had defined both men's lives. They had met in 1990 at a development conference in Chicago. Victor, then a struggling contractor with big dreams but limited capital, had approached Thomas, already a successful investment banker, with an ambitious proposal for affordable housing in underserved Boston neighborhoods. Where other investors had seen only risk, Thomas had recognized vision. "You're thinking beyond profit margins," Thomas had told him that day. "That's rare in our business." The investment had launched Harrington Developments, and over the years their professional relationship had evolved into something closer to friendship. Two self-made men who understood sacrifice and ambition. During the 2008 financial crisis, when Victor's company teetered on bankruptcy, Thomas had extended the critical financing that saved everything Victor had built. "Why risk it?" Victor had asked then. Thomas's answer had stayed with him. "Because some debts aren't financial, Victor. Sometimes we pay forward what others have given us." Now driving through the storm, Victor understood that Thomas had been preparing him for this moment long before either of them realized it. The trust required to safeguard someone's most precious legacy, their child, wasn't built overnight. It had been forged through decades of demonstrated character. His phone rang. "Jessica Barnes. Judge Hoffman has issued an emergency arrest warrant for Victoria Reed on kidnapping charges," she reported. "State police are mobilizing, but they're maintaining radio silence as requested." "Tell them to hold position until my signal," Victor instructed. "We can't risk a direct confrontation while she has hostages." "Victor," Jessica hesitated. "Be careful. Victoria's previous husbands underestimated her. None survived the mistake." The cemetery gate stood open despite the late hour and ominous invitation. Victor parked near the entrance, taking the leather portfolio and stepping into the rain. The storm had intensified, wind whipping through the ancient oaks that guarded the cemetery's perimeter. Thomas Reed's grave lay near the center, a temporary marker awaiting the permanent monument Victoria had commissioned, an obscene display of wealth and false grieving. As Victor approached, he spotted a slender figure standing beside the grave, sheltered under a large black umbrella. Right on time, Victoria's voice carried an undertone of triumph. I've always appreciated punctuality in business associates. We're not associates. Victor stopped several paces away, rain soaking through his coat. Where are they? Victoria extended her hand. The evidence first. Not until I know they're safe. A cold smile played across Victoria's perfect features. You're hardly in a position to make demands, Victor. But as a gesture of good faith, she removed a phone from her pocket, dialed, and held it toward him on speaker. Say hello to Victor, Victoria instructed someone on the other end. Victor, Margaret's voice strained but steady. Don't trust her. She's... The connection cut abruptly. Satisfied, Victoria returned the phone to her pocket. Now the evidence. Victor held up the portfolio. Release them first. That's not how this works. Victoria's patience visibly thinned. Perhaps you need additional motivation. She snapped with her fingers and two men emerged from the shadows among the gravestones. Professional muscle as Daniel had predicted. Last chance, Victoria warned. The portfolio or my associates will relay instructions that will result in quite unpleasant consequences for your friends. Victor assessed the situation rapidly. The men were clearly armed, their posture indicating professional training. A direct confrontation would be futile. He extended the portfolio. Everything's here. All copies, all evidence. Victoria nodded to one of her men who approached cautiously to retrieve the portfolio. He handed it to Victoria, who opened it to examine the contents, sheltering the documents from the rain beneath her umbrella. Very comprehensive, she commented, leafing through the papers. Thomas was always thorough, a quality I initially admired before it became inconvenient. I've fulfilled my part, Victor said evenly. Now release them. Victoria closed the portfolio with deliberate slowness. About that, I'm afraid there's been a change in terms. You see, Sophie has become quite attached to me again. Amazing how forgiving children can be when properly motivated. Rage surged through Victor, but he maintained his outward composure. Daniel needed time to locate the hostages. Every moment Victoria spent gloating was another moment for the rescue team to succeed. What do you want, Victoria, beyond the evidence? What I've always wanted, control of what's rightfully mine. She stepped closer, her expensive perfume mingling with the scent of rain and earth. Thomas built his fortune on my sacrifices. Sophie is my insurance policy, literally and figuratively. She's a child, not a commodity. She's my stepdaughter and my ticket to continuing the lifestyle I've earned. Victoria's expression hardened. Which brings me to the final term of our agreement, your permanent removal from the equation. The two men moved with practiced efficiency, closing in on Victor from both sides. Nothing personal, Victoria added with mock sympathy. But you've proven troublesome in ways I didn't anticipate. The cemetery seems an appropriate location, don't you think? You can keep Thomas company. Victor had anticipated this betrayal, but the reality of his vulnerability in this moment struck him with cold clarity. He had gambled with his life to save Sophie and Margaret. Any last words? Victoria's smile was predatory. I'll be sure to console poor Sophie over losing yet another protector. She's becoming quite accustomed to grief. Just one question, Victor replied calmly. Did you check the evidence thoroughly? Victoria frowned, reopening the portfolio. Inside, atop Thomas's journal, lay a small GPS tracking device blinking steadily. Her head snapped up, comprehension dawning too late. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the storm's fury, red and blue lights suddenly illuminating the cemetery entrance. Now, Victor shouted, diving sideways, as floodlights blazed from multiple directions, temporarily blinding Victoria and her associates. State police officers emerged from concealed positions among the graves, weapons drawn. Please freeze, drop your weapons. Victoria's men hesitated, then complied, slowly lowering their guns to the ground. Victoria herself stood motionless, her umbrella discarded, rain plastering her designer clothing to her slender frame. Victoria Reed, the lead officer announced, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As Victoria was handcuffed, her composure finally shattered. This changes nothing, she screamed at Victor. They're already dead. I gave the order the moment you arrived. Terror gripped Victor's heart. Where are they? Where Victoria's laugh held no humor. You'll never find them in time. Victor's phone vibrated. Daniel Roberts calling. He answered instantly, moving away from the police activity. Daniel, we found them. Cabin off Morrison Road, about 3 miles from the cemetery. Margaret's injured, but alive. Sophie's unharmed, physically at least. Relief coursed through Victor's body like a physical force. Victoria's associates. 2 men neutralized. Apparently they received orders to execute the hostages, but hesitated when they saw our approach. Sophie's quite remarkable, Victor. She created a distraction that gave us the opening we needed. I'm on my way. Victor ended the call, turning back to Victoria as officers led her toward a waiting police vehicle. Her perfect mask had disintegrated completely, revealing the desperate, cornered predator beneath. This isn't over, Victor. I still have resources you can't imagine. It is over, Victoria. Victor's voice carried absolute certainty. You miscalculated from the beginning. Not about Thomas or Richard or even me. You miscalculated about Sophie. You saw weakness where there was strength. Victoria's expression contorted with rage as the officers guided her into the police car. As the vehicle pulled away, Victor felt a strange sense of incompletion. Justice was in motion, but the emotional resolution he had expected remained elusive. The cabin where Margaret and Sophie had been held sat nestled among pine trees, its rustic exterior belying the drama that had unfolded within. Medical personnel were treating Margaret on the porch while police secured the scene. Victor approached, slowly scanning for Sophie. He found her sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a heavy blanket, Mr. Buttons clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide but dry. Her small face set in that unnaturally composed expression he had come to recognize as her defense mechanism. When she saw him, something shifted in her expression, a cautious hope breaking through the careful blankness. You came, she said simply. I promised I would. Victor sat beside her on the ambulance step, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Are you hurt? Sophie shook her head. They didn't hit me, just Ms. Margaret when she tried to stop them. She studied his rain-soaked appearance. You're all wet. It's raining at the cemetery. Understanding dawned in Sophie's eyes. You saw Victoria. Yes, she's been arrested. She can't hurt you anymore. Sophie absorbed this information with a thoughtful gravity that made her seem far older than 6. She said you wouldn't come, that nobody ever really comes back for promises. The simple statement revealed volumes about the betrayals this child had experienced. Some promises matter more than others, Sophie. Promises to protect someone who needs you, those are the ones that have to be kept no matter what. Sophie nodded as if confirming something she had suspected, but needed verified. I knew you'd come. I drew it. She reached into Mr. Button's stuffing through a small opening in the seam, extracting a folded paper. The crayon drawing showed a stick figure in the rain approaching a building where 2 smaller figures waited by a window. I made it at Haven House, Sophie explained, before the bad men came. Dr. Parker says sometimes we know things before they happen. Victor studied the drawing, recognizing the intuitive wisdom. Children sometimes possess the ability to sense patterns, impossibilities adults often missed. It helped me be brave, Sophie continued. When the men got a phone call and looked angry, I remembered my picture. I knew you were coming, so I knocked over the lamp like an accident. Pride tinged her voice. It made a big noise, and that's when Mr. Daniel's people came through the windows. That was very brave and very smart. Victor acknowledged, marveling at her presence of mind. My daddy said sometimes you have to make your own rescue, Sophie confided. He told me stories about being brave when I was scared of thunderstorms. The mention of Thomas brought a fresh wave of grief to her shins, but it passed quickly, replaced by determination. Can we go home now? She asked. I'm tired of adventures. The simple request contained worlds of meaning. Home. Not the Reed mansion with its dark memories, but somewhere safe. Somewhere with Victor. Yes, Sophie, we can go home. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, sunlight replacing the night's tempestuous storm. The coastal estate gleamed in the fresh clarity that often follows chaos, windows reflecting the endless blue of the Atlantic. Sophie slept late, emotionally exhausted from the night's events. Margaret, sporting a bandaged forehead but otherwise recovered, joined Victor for coffee on the terrace. The hearings had been postponed until Monday. she reported, settling carefully into a chair. Judge Hoffman wants to review all evidence thoroughly given the extraordinary circumstances. And Victoria denied bail. The district attorney added attempted murder charges this morning based on last night's events. Margaret sipped her coffee. Richard Hayes has been granted limited immunity in exchange for his complete testimony. Victor nodded, gazing out at the ocean. Sophie appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. Mr. Buttons in her customary place against her chest. "Good morning," Victor greeted her. "Hungry," Sophie nodded, climbing into the chair beside him. "Can I have pancakes? Daddy made pancakes on Sundays." "Absolutely," Victor signaled to the waiting staff. "Any particular kind?" "Blueberry," Sophie decided after careful consideration. "With extra syrup." As they ate breakfast together, Sophie gradually relaxed, occasionally offering observations about clouds or seagulls. These small, normal moments felt profoundly significant, the first tentative steps toward healing. After breakfast, Sophie asked to draw on the terrace. Victor provided paper and a fresh box of crayons, then sat nearby reviewing emails while she worked. Margaret had gone inside to speak with Dr. Parker about continuing therapy arrangements. Victor's phone rang. "Daniel Roberts again. We have a situation. Can you speak privately?" Victor moved to the far end of the terrace out of Sophie's earshot. "What's wrong?" "Police found a second phone in Victoria's possession during processing. Call logs show recent contacts with someone in the Boston District Attorney's Office, Alexander Cortez." "The Chief Deputy DA?" Victor frowned. "That explains how she's managed to avoid prosecution for so long." "There's more. Cortez has filed an emergency motion to review Victoria's case personally, citing procedural irregularities. He's trying to get her released on a technicality." Victor's jaw tightened. "Victoria's contingency plan." "Exactly. The judge assigned to review the motion is Carolyn Dixon, a frequent dinner guest of Cortez." "When's the hearing?" 4 hours from now. Jessica's trying to get it moved to Judge Hoffman's court, but Cortez has significant influence." Victor watched Sophie drawing peacefully, unaware of this new threat. "Do whatever it takes to keep Victoria in custody. I don't care what strings need pulling or favors called in. She doesn't get anywhere near Sophie again." After ending the call, Victor contacted Jessica Barnes immediately. "What do we need to counter Cortez? Evidence of his connection to Victoria." Jessica's voice was tight with frustration. "But he's been careful. Their communications went through intermediaries' burner phones. There must be a money trail." Victor paced the terrace. "No one like Cortez helps someone like Victoria without compensation. We're looking, but offshore accounts are difficult to trace quickly. We need time." Victor thought of the contents of Thomas's secret box. Check the USB drive from Thomas's evidence. He was methodical. If he suspected Victoria was poisoning him, he might have investigated who was protecting her. 4 hours later, Victor sat in the courtroom as Judge Dixon reviewed Victoria's case. Alexander Cortez, a polished man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and an air of unquestioned authority, presented his argument with practiced conviction. "Your Honor, Ms. Reed's civil rights have been egregiously violated. The warrant for her arrest was obtained without proper evidentiary standards, and the search of her property exceeded the scope of said warrant." Judge Dixon nodded sympathetically. "Mr. Barnes, your response to these serious allegations?" Jessica rose, her expression calm despite the stakes. "Your Honor, before I address Mr. Cortez's claims, I would like to submit new evidence directly relevant to these proceedings." She presented a file to the court clerk, who delivered it to the judge. "This document details financial transfers from an offshore account controlled by Victoria Reed to a shell company whose beneficial owner is Alexander Cortez." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cortez's face flushed crimson. "This is preposterous, Your Honor. An obvious attempt to distract from the procedural violations." "The evidence came directly from Thomas Reed's personal files," Jessica continued steadily. "He documented Ms. Reed's systematic efforts to corrupt justice officials before his death." Judge Dixon's expression had changed dramatically as she reviewed the documents. "Mr. Cortez, these are serious allegations. I'm recusing myself from this matter immediately and referring these documents to the State Ethics Committee." Within minutes, the hearing was adjourned, with Victoria remanded back to custody, pending a full review by Judge Hoffman. Cortez left the courtroom and barely concealed panic already on his phone to what Victor presumed was his attorney. Outside the courthouse, Jessica allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Thomas Reed was indeed thorough. The USB drive contained a complete financial investigation, including Cortez's involvement in dismissing inquiries into the deaths of Victoria's previous husbands. Thomas knew she would come after Sophie, Victor realized. He was preparing for this fight long before he died. Which explains the silver key, Jessica added. Tanishing. Thomas mentioned it specifically in his notes, that he'd given you a silver office key years ago as a symbol of trust. He believed you'd recognize its significance if something happened to him. The pieces aligned with perfect clarity. Thomas hadn't just selected Victor as Sophie's guardian out of friendship. He'd chosen him because Victor possessed the combination of resources, determination, and personal integrity to stand against Victoria's network of corruption. Back at the estate, Victor found Sophie in the garden with Margaret collecting shells along the private beach. The child looked up at his approach, her expression brightening. "Look what I found." She held up a perfect spiral shell, pristine white against her small palm. "Margaret says it's a moon snail." "It's beautiful," Victor acknowledged, kneeling beside her. "Sophie, there's something important I need to tell you." Her expression immediately sobered, bracing for bad news. Another learned defense mechanism that broke Victor's heart. "Victoria tried to get out of jail today," he explained gently. "But she failed. The judge is going to make sure she stays there for a very long time." Sophie digested this information silently, then asked, "Because of Daddy's secret box?" "Yes, your father was very smart. He left evidence that helps prove everything Victoria did wrong." Sophie nodded, returning her attention to the shell. "Daddy told me the secret box was magic, that it would keep me safe even after he went to heaven." She looked up at Victor. He was right. The weekend passed in gentle rhythm, each hour bringing small moments of normal life that served as building blocks for their future. Sophie had nightmares both nights, waking in tears, but each time Victor sat with her until she fell back asleep, his mere presence providing the security she needed. By Monday morning, as they prepared for the hearing, Sophie seemed more settled. She had selected her outfit carefully, a purple dress with a white collar, matching hair ribbon, and new shoes Margaret had purchased. Mr. Button's somewhat repaired and cleaned remained her constant companion. "Do I have to see Victoria?" she asked as they drove toward the courthouse. "No," Victor assured her. "Victoria is in a different place now. The judge just wants to make sure you're happy with your new home." Sophie nodded, gazing out the window. "I am happy. Not all the way happy yet because I still miss Daddy, but getting better happy." "That's the perfect kind of happy to be right now," Victor assured her. At the courthouse, Jessica Barnes met them on the steps, professional as always, but with an uncharacteristic warmth in her greeting to Sophie. "The judge would like to speak with Sophie privately for a few minutes before the formal hearing," she explained. "Standard procedure in guardianship cases involving children old enough to express preferences." Victor knelt to Sophie's eye level. "The judge wants to talk to you alone for a little bit. Just answer his questions honestly, okay?" "There are no wrong answers." Sophie clutched Mr. Buttons tighter, but nodded bravely. "Will you wait for me?" "Right outside the door, I promise." As a court officer led Sophie away, Victor turned to Jessica. "Any updates on Cortez?" "Resigned this morning ahead of the ethics investigation. 3 more officials connected to Victoria have also stepped down. The entire protection network is unraveling." "And Richard Hayes?" "Cooperating fully. The DA believes his testimony will be crucial in prosecuting Victoria for Thomas's murder." Judge Hoffman kept his conversation with Sophie brief, less than 15 minutes. When the door reopened, Sophie emerged with a small smile, immediately seeking Victor with her eyes. The formal hearing proceeded with surprising simplicity. Judge Hoffman reviewed the extensive evidence noting Victoria's arrest in the corruption investigation now expanding throughout the Justice Department. He acknowledged Thomas Reed's explicit wishes in his will, then invited Victor to address the court. Victor stood, his prepared statement suddenly seeming inadequate. "Your Honor, 4 days ago, I stopped my car because I saw a child in distress. I had no intention of becoming a guardian or a parent." He paused, finding Sophie's eyes in the courtroom. "But sometimes life places us exactly where we need to be, even when it's not where we plan to go." Sophie Reed has taught me more about courage and resilience in 4 days than I've learned in 58 years. I can't promise to be a perfect guardian, but I can promise to put her needs first to keep her safe and to help her grow into the extraordinary person she's already becoming. Judge Hoffman nodded thoughtfully. I spoke with Sophie earlier. Despite her young age, she expressed her wishes with remarkable clarity. She said, and I quote, "Mr. Victor keeps his promises. I want to stay with him forever." The judge's stern demeanor softened slightly. In light of all evidence and circumstances, this court grants permanent legal guardianship of Sophie Reed to Victor Harrington, effective immediately. The gavel struck with finality, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a period at the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Outside the courthouse, away from cameras and reporters, Sophie took Victor's hand as they walked to the car. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we go home," Victor replied, "and we figure out the rest together one day at a time." Sophie considered this approach. "That sounds like a good plan." 3 months later, Victor sat in the newly renovated study of the coastal home they now shared permanently. The space had been transformed from its former austere elegance to something warmer, with comfortable furniture and walls lined with both business awards and Sophie's framed artwork. On his desk sat a photograph of Thomas Reed placed there at Sophie's request. "So Daddy can watch over us while we work." A knock at the door preceded Jessica Barnes's entrance. "The papers are finalized," she announced, placing a folder on his desk. "Sophie Reed is now officially Sophie Reed Harrington, if she chooses to use both names." "Thank you, Jessica, for everything." Jessica smiled, uncharacteristically warm. "I received this today. Thought you should see it." She handed Victor an envelope bearing the Massachusetts Department of Corrections seal. Inside was a letter from Victoria Reed addressed to the parole board. "I maintain my innocence regarding the allegations against me. Thomas Reed's death was a tragic medical event, not murder. My stepdaughter, Sophie, belongs with me, her rightful guardian, not with Victor Harrington, a man who has manipulated the child in the courts for his own purposes. I request immediate consideration for bail pending my appeal." Victor set the letter down. "Some people never change." "The good news is the parole board rejected her request unanimously," Jessica replied. "With the evidence continuing to mount from her previous husband's deaths, she'll likely never see freedom again." "Has she had any contact with Richard?" "None. He's been transferred to a minimum security facility in exchange for his continued cooperation. His testimony has been invaluable." After Jessica departed, Victor completed one final task before leaving for the day. He opened his desk drawer and removed Thomas Reed's silver key, the one that had opened the secret box and changed everything. He placed it in a small velvet pouch alongside a note he had written, explaining its significance and the 30-year friendship that had led to this moment. Sophie would receive this key on her 18th birthday, a connection to her father and a symbol of the promises that had shaped her life. Victor had already established an educational trust in her name, ensuring Thomas's legacy would support his daughter's future. At Haven House now expanded with additional funding and renamed the Reed Harrington Children's Center. Sophie waited with Margaret, having completed her therapy session for the day. Upon seeing Victor, she ran to him with the unself-conscious enthusiasm that still surprised him each time. "We're helping new kids today," she informed him importantly. "Two brothers. They're scared, but I showed them my special drawing place and told them it's okay to be scared sometimes." Victor felt a surge of pride at her natural empathy. "That was very kind of you, Sophie." Margaret approached with a knowing smile. "Sophie's quite the mentor already. The new children respond to her instinctively." As they drove home, Sophie chattered about school preparations and her new therapist's suggestions for managing nightmares. "Dr. Parker says when I get scared, remembering the bad things, I should think about my safe place instead," she explained. "My safe place is our beach, with you watching me collect shells." Victor's phone vibrated with an incoming call, Daniel Roberts' number. He answered using the car's speaker system. "Victor thought you should know immediately. There was an incident at the women's correctional facility an hour ago." Sophie fell silent, instantly alert. "What kind of incident?" Victor asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Victoria Reed was found unconscious in her cell. Apparent suicide attempt." Victor glanced at Sophie, who was watching him intently. "Is she alive but in critical condition, being transferred to the prison ward at Massachusetts General?" "I see. Keep me updated." Victor ended the call, uncertain how to address this with Sophie, who had clearly understood enough to be concerned. To his surprise, Sophie spoke first. "Victoria tried to hurt herself, didn't she?" "Yes. How did you know?" "Your face got all tight like when you're worried about bad people." Sophie looked out the window. "Is she going to die?" "I don't know," Victor answered honestly. "The doctors are trying to help her." Sophie was quiet for several moments processing this. Finally, she asked, "Can we visit her not up close, just to tell her we don't hate her?" The request stunned Victor. "You want to visit Victoria after everything she did?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Daddy always said hate just makes more hate." And she hesitated. "Maybe if she knows she's not all alone, she won't want to hurt herself anymore." Victor studied Sophie in the rearview mirror, this remarkable child whose capacity for compassion transcended her experiences. "If that's what you want, we can try to arrange it, but only from a safe distance and only if the doctors say it's okay." "Thank you." Sophie returned to looking out the window. Everyone needs somebody, sometimes even bad people. That evening, as had become their custom, Victor read to Sophie before bedtime. She selected a book about a lighthouse keeper saving sailors from a storm, cuddling against his side as he turned the pages. When the story ended, Sophie remained thoughtful, stroking Mr. Buttons' worn fur. "Daddy used to say that storms don't last forever," she said finally. "But sometimes you need a light to find your way home." "Your father was a wise man," Victor acknowledged, "and he was right about storms." Sophie yawned, settling deeper into her pillows. "I think you were my lighthouse, Mr. Victor, when Victoria made the big storm come." The simple metaphor captured their journey with surprising accuracy. Victor had indeed been a fixed point of safety in Sophie's darkest moment. What she couldn't yet understand was how thoroughly she had transformed him in return. "Good night, Sophie," he said gently, tucking the blankets around her shoulders. "Good night." She hesitated briefly before adding, "Dad." The words spoken for the first time hung in the air between them, a bridge between their past and future, between loss and new beginnings. As Victor quietly closed her bedroom door, leaving it ajar as she preferred, he paused in the hallway to absorb the magnitude of what had transpired in his life. 4 days of crisis had launched a lifetime of commitment. A random encounter in the rain had revealed a purpose he hadn't known he was seeking. From his office window, Victor watched the moon cast a silver path across the Atlantic waters. Somewhere beyond that shimmering light, he could imagine Thomas Reed looking down with approval at the unexpected family that had formed from tragedy. The next morning brought news from the hospital. Victoria Reed had stabilized but remained under close observation. A psychiatric evaluation had been ordered. More surprising was her request delivered through her attorney to speak with Victor. "It's a manipulation tactic," Jessica warned when Victor called for advice. "She's looking for any angle to improve her situation." "Probably," Victor agreed. "But what if it's not? What if Sophie's instinct about loneliness has merit? You're not actually considering meeting with her from behind glass with full security and recording. If there's any chance of bringing complete closure for Sophie, it's worth the risk." 2 days later, Victor sat in the secure visitation room at Massachusetts General's prison ward. Victoria Reed entered, escorted by 2 guards, looking markedly different from the polished socialite he had confronted in the cemetery. Her designer clothes had been replaced by hospital scrubs, her perfect makeup absent, revealing a pallor that spoke of genuine illness. "You actually came," she observed, as she took her seat opposite the thick glass partition. "Surprising. Sophie asked me to." Victor studied her, looking for signs of the manipulative performance he expected. Instead, he saw something unfamiliar in her eyes, uncertainty. "How is she?" Victoria asked after a long pause. "Healing, resilient, concerned about you surprisingly." Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She was always too forgiving. Thomas was the same way. She looked down at her hands. "I wasn't always the person who did those things." "No one starts that way," Victor acknowledged, "but choices accumulate. I've been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features," Victoria stated flatly. "Apparently, I lack the capacity for empathy most people possess. The psychiatrist says it was likely present from childhood exacerbated by abuse. That explains your actions, but doesn't excuse them." "I'm not looking for excuses or forgiveness." Victoria met his gaze directly. I wanted to see the man Thomas trusted more than his own brother, the man who accomplished what I thought impossible, which was breaking my control. In 37 years, no one has ever truly beaten me at my own game. A hint of her former self surfaced briefly. I underestimated you. And Sophie. Why the suicide attempt? Victoria's mask slipped entirely, revealing unexpected vulnerability. Because for the first time in my life, I saw the full scope of what I've done. The psychiatrist calls it a moment of clarity. I call it hell. Victor wasn't entirely convinced this wasn't another performance, but something in her demeanor suggested authentic distress. What do you want from this meeting, Victoria? To ask you to give Sophie something from me. She gestured to one of the guards who handed her a small envelope, which she passed through the security slot. It's been examined. Just a letter explaining that what happened wasn't her fault. Children blame themselves for adults' actions. I should know. Victor accepted the envelope cautiously. I'll read it first. If it's appropriate, I'll give it to her. Victoria nodded, seeming to expect this response. Tell her. She paused, struggling visibly with unfamiliar emotional territory. Tell her I'm sorry, not that it matters. It might matter to her, Victor replied. Children have a capacity for healing that adults often lose. As Victoria was escorted back to her room, Victor felt an unexpected sense of completion. The monster who had threatened Sophie had been revealed as merely human. Damaged, dangerous, but ultimately defeated not by force but by truth and the simple resilience of a child's spirit. That evening, after carefully reading Victoria's letter and finding it appropriate, Victor gave it to Sophie. She read it silently, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. She's very sad inside, Sophie observed finally. That's why she was so mean. That might be part of it, Victor acknowledged, marveling at her insight. Can I write back to her? Not to be friends, just to tell her I'm okay now. If you want to, we can arrange that. Sophie nodded decisively. I think it would help her feel less alone in the storm. From his office window, Victor watched the setting sun paint the Atlantic horizon in shades of gold and purple. In the garden below, Sophie sat cross-legged on a blanket, carefully writing her letter with the serious concentration she brought to important tasks. Victor Harrington, builder of skyscrapers and business empires, had finally constructed something truly enduring, a home where healing could happen even for the most wounded spirits. In saving Sophie, he had found his own redemption from decades of emotional isolation. In trusting Victor with his daughter's future, Thomas Reed had given his friend the most precious gift imaginable, the chance to become the man he was always meant to be. The storm had passed, and in its wake, two souls once adrift had become each other's shelter, each other's lighthouse, guiding the way toward whatever weather might come next.